Exactly 1 month today, February 24th, Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the biggest offensive in Europe since World War II, and implied the possibility of nuclear escalation if the West intervened. The month-long war on Ukraine has killed thousands of people, displaced millions of refugees, and devastated cities. Yet, Russian armed forces are unable to seize control of Ukraine, despite the bombardment of Ukrainian cities with artillery, airstrikes, and missiles. As the war continues with no ceasefire in sight, many Nigerians have been evacuated, courtesy of the federal government of Nigeria. Joining us from our Abuja studio to review the month-long war and its implications on Africa, and indeed Nigeria, is Joe Keshi, a former Nigerian ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Keshi was also a former Nigerian diplomat who served in many countries, including Togo, Ethiopia, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Namibia, to name just a few. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Tunde, and thanks for having me.
Well, good morning, Ambassador Keshi. Thank you for joining us. Well, 1 month since the invasion started in Ukraine, Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, what's your assessment of the situation so far? As NATO meets today, and ahead of that NATO meeting, the U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Smith, has been saying that NATO is going to put together a group of 4 forces, 4 different groups, not necessarily national forces, but to join national forces in Eastern Europe. Are we facing the risk of an all-out war or World War III, as people have been suspecting?
Good morning, Ruben, and thanks for having me. With regard to your first question, it's 1 month. It's been devastating for Ukraine as a country. And anybody who watches the daily news can see the massive devastation, the destruction of a once beautiful country by the Russian Air Force. It's simply unfortunate. It's heart-rending. It's even more if you have once been a refugee like myself, fleeing from a war zone, to see 10 million people already out of Ukraine as refugees. It's honestly not only disheartening, but devastating for a country like Ukraine. But what is even worse is that, we've been left to imagine what is Putin's or the Russians' game plan at the end of the day. They've offered some conditions for peace. And if you look at some of those conditions, yes, they are negotiable, but you ask yourself the simple question. These conditions or these requests should have been resolved without necessarily, destroying the country of Ukraine. It's simply very unfortunate. As for what NATO can do, I personally, at this point in time, I have said on your program before that it takes quite a time before sanctions begin to work. But honestly, the way I feel today, I just think that the NATO and the G7 and the rest of the world should begin to think seriously about doing one thing or the other, particularly intervene to stop the complete destruction of Ukraine as we know it.
Thank you, sir. What do you make of reports that morale is low amongst Russian troops and that a top Putin aide has quit and left Russia as a result of this invasion of Ukraine? Does that give any kind of hope, or is that wishful thinking on the part of the West?
Tunde, is both. Honestly, it's both. Look, the resignation of one top senior advisor does not change anything in Putin's Russia. Putin is the czar. He makes all the decisions. So one man jumping ship certainly would not be of any consequences to him at this point in time. That morale is low, yes. If you've ever been around troops fighting in this kind of senseless war, yes, morals actually, fall apart in so many ways, particularly when they are not getting their supplies and they have no clear understanding of why they are fighting and destroying things the way they are currently doing. So I pay very little attention to that. What I want to see happen today is a big and massive relief for Ukraine and its people. That's all I think we all should look forward to. Whether the Russians are losing faith in themselves, that's their headache. But how do we get assistance? How do we stop the war? How do we get immediate assistance to the people of Ukraine? I think that should be our major concern and focus.
So there are reports that Ramad Kadyrov, the Chechen leader, known warlord, has gotten into the fight. In fact, there were sightings of him in Kyiv and some other parts of Ukraine, and he's leading the onslaught, fighting vis-a-vis the Russian troops. What should be done as regards that?
Well, look, it just shows you two things. Number one, if the Russians now have to depend on mercenaries or whatever you call them, to fight the war, it just shows it. Because, look, one of the calculations, apparently, of Putin going into this war was the firm belief that the modified Russian army, can actually end this within a jiffy. I'm not sure that they calculated or they made allowance that 1 month later, they've been in this kind of, predicament. All they have achieved at the end of the day is just the destruction of a number of cities. But the truth of the matter is that if they are now wanting to depend on mercenaries to fight their war, we should begin, and I think I said this last time I was here, we should begin to question exactly the so-called superpower nature of Russia. Because it has a nuclear arms, fair enough, that's true, that gives it some extra power. But if you do not have a strong military that can overrun a country that hasn't got as much as you have in terms of arsenal, within 1 month, it just shows that you made a big calculation. And looking at, beg your pardon?
Let's go
ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir.
No. Yeah, no, I was saying that, look, it also shows that something was faulty with the intelligence the Russians have. Apparently, they did not take into account the resolve, the determination of the people of Ukraine to resist any invasion or to defend their country. I think for me, this has been the greatest strength of the Ukrainians, that resolve to defend themselves and to ensure that they have a country at the end of the day.
Okay, Ambassador Keshi, a few days ago, it was reported that the Ukrainian ambassador to Nigeria was praising Nigeria and 140 other countries for taking part for supporting that non-binding resolution on the floor of the United Nations General Assembly, condemning Russian invasion of Ukraine and calling for sanctions. Well, it was a non-binding resolution, but is that consistent in terms of Nigeria's foreign policy choices? Because I thought in this kind of situation, Nigeria often tries to be neutral. And there were countries that played neutral. But in this particular instance, Nigeria made a choice to join that resolution against Russia. Is that something we should have done?
No, I personally applaud and support Nigerian position. Ruben, you do not engage in being neutral in the face of so much, unnecessary provocation and the destruction of a country. I have seen a lot of arguments, particularly among my colleagues, whether we were wrong or right, to take this decision. But look, we took a decision that I believe is based on our national interest. I have repeatedly said this, we are not too far from experience. We are lucky, first of all, as a nation, that we do not have hostile neighbors and nobody is interested in annexing Nigeria. Our neighbors are also lucky that we have no, ambition to expand our territory and the rest of it all. But the point still remains that whether we like it or not, and this is what, today, for example, there are debates going on in the United Nations. There are two resolutions, one from, I think, Ukraine and France or somebody, and then one from South Africa. The problem with the South African one is that out of its trying to be neutral, it's also creating an embarrassment when the president says that, Russia is not the aggressor. And so that makes that very difficult for most people to support. But look, in this case, if you want peace, you must learn to tell the truth. Diplomacy is not all about, the insisting that you have to lie or you close your eyes in the face of evil and in the face of oppression. No, that is not diplomacy. And I think that we made a decision to stand firm. Look, it will not affect at the end of the way. This is a non-binding resolution, but I think it's a message to Russia that its actions, are wrong, and that it needs to consider and take steps, to bring the war to an end.
Right, thank you, sir. What are your thoughts on President Biden officially branding Vladimir Putin as a war criminal? What is the practical purpose of that? I mean, the war criminal connotations, if you think of the International Criminal Court, America is not a member state. So how far can America really take this?
This is the problem sometimes with American diplomacy. You have never supported the court. You have never allowed any American charged with offenses to go before the court. But you are the first to, declare somebody a war criminal. So how do you get that criminal into the war court itself? I mean, what moral justification do you have when you are not a member of the court? You have never supported the court. You have never allowed Americans found guilty of war crimes to be tried in that court. Again, I think these are all part of the distractions, as these leaders struggle to find a way to compel Russia to be reasonable, I'm not too sure Russia is going to be reasonable at this point in time. I just believe at this point in time that, they should expand more energy on how to confront Russia or how to get Russia to stop, in particular, the unnecessary and devastating, destruction of Ukraine. That should be the primary concern at this point in time. Not whether you declare Putin a war criminal. It's almost, I don't know how you will get him anyway, or you discard Russia. Look, that's going to take quite some time. The most urgent thing today is to find a war to stop this, to find a way to stop the war and to begin to rehabilitate Ukraine as a country.
Which is not possible now because the war has gone over a month now, which we didn't think it was going to last this long. But another question will be, what can Nigeria really do in all of this? And I ask because dial back to the 70s when a certain company, British company, BP, lifted oil from here and took it to apartheid South Africa. Nigeria was really irate. The Commissioner for Foreign Affairs then was my king's man, Major General Adifo, and they brought big sanctions on BP and they nationalized BP. Do we still have that muscle to make a definitive point in all of this?
Rufai, the simple answer, regrettably, is no. Foreign policy, the strength of your foreign policy depends on your domestic policy. Today, by all indications, we are at our lowest ebb, and you do not embark on an unnecessary, ambitious goal in terms of foreign policy when you are in this kind of situation. Number two, we're able to deal with the situation regarding Britain because we had a very close economic relationship with Britain, and we also had something we could strike at. Today, with regard to Nigerian-Russian relationship, I'm not too sure we have much that can be. The Ajakuta, which could have been the most significant, a point of reference in terms of our relationship with Russia. It's been comatose for as long as anybody can remember. But here's what I think we can do, and here's what I think that African nations collectively should have done. I think when events like this do take place, Africa should not sit behind and pretend that they do not know anything is happening. There's nothing wrong, and nothing, heavens won't fall if some very key presidents in Africa decide to send messages, or even take a trip to Russia to meet the Russian leader and then talk to the, Ukrainian leader. Or, look, even a phone call. The rest of the world was making these phone calls. Some actually visited. Nothing prevented Nigeria or, other African leaders from coming together and sending their foreign ministers or even having a phone call conversation, with the Russians and the Ukrainians before this war started. And even immediately after the war, there's still nothing wrong today if they pick up the phone and add their voice as a pressure on Putin, and also talk to the Ukrainian leader to see whether they can help, push everybody to find a common ground, that they can negotiate with and bring this, unnecessary devastation and, innocent death of people to an end.
The U.S. has decided to expel 12 Russian diplomats from the United Nations. And then Russia is also promising tit for tat. It's threatening to also expel U.S. diplomats in Russia. Of what effect is this, other than just diplomatic showboating? That's one. The second one is Russia actually stoppable, or Russia is unstoppable? Considering the fact that when Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, the rest of the world could not make any difference. When Russia decided to annex Crimea in 2014, it practically got away with it. Is Russia going to get away with this time around?
Well, Ruben, time will tell. For whatever reason, definitely, I think you can see the difference between the leadership in the United States at that time that you referred to and the current leadership. One of the unfortunate things one of the things that have emerged, and I have a strong feeling that this must also have been one of the calculations that Putin made, that at the end of the American, disaster in Afghanistan, that America was weakened. I'm sure they also took into consideration that Europe has lost interest, in the American leadership of NATO, and that was probably would be very challenging for anybody after post-Trump to repair. But unfortunately, what has happened now is that NATO is not just far stronger than it was a couple of years ago. If you look at recent opinion poll, most Europeans actually today support NATO massively, and thanks to, to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I'm saying, yes, it will be very difficult to probably at the end of the day get away with this, because the amount of sanctions and there are the indications that more sanctions are coming that has been imposed is massive. Number two, NATO is far united, far more united today than when Crimea or when Georgia was invaded. So I think 1 month after, and the Russians just can't end this. Who knows what could happen in the next couple of weeks or months, now that there are indications and there are reports that the Ukrainians are beginning to get their acts together and they're actually fighting back. They've recaptured, a few places, and they have managed to ward off an immediate collapse of Kiev. So we just have to wait and see. Honestly, but I go back to where I started from, that, look, the world at this point in time needs to find a way to end the situation in Ukraine.
Well, I just want to digress, sir, but what's your reaction to the passing of Madeline Albright, the first female U.S. Foreign Secretary?
I don't really know what to say. I wanted to say it's unfortunate, but it just occurred to me that, look, death comes to everybody, and unfortunately she died of cancer. She was a very effective and admired, Secretary of State, and being the first lady, and one of the top professors in Georgetown University. I think that the world has really lost a very strong voice, particularly a lady who campaigned a lot for women issues, who was responsible for ensuring that there was, some nuclear deals to reduce the amount of nuclear, armaments around the world. I'm sure the United States foreign policy establishment will certainly miss our wise counsel and advice. But it has so rest in peace. As I said, she was a very effective and admired foreign minister Secretary of State around the world.
Thank you for that. The U.S. have a Secretary of State, the U.K. have a Foreign Secretary. But speaking of nuclear disarmament, I'm sure Ukraine really ruled the day that they got rid of their nukes. Never mind. Rufai?
Look, I just want to say to you, Tundu, that you've made a very good point. I'm sure that Ukraine looks back today with regret that they actually did what they did a couple of years ago. And look, both sides of the aisle, at that time actually persuaded Ukraine to do away with their nuclear weapons. I'm sure they look back now and they are full of regret that they did that. And secondly, if the West, NATO, and the Western Alliance have not discarded the use of force, if they have allowed everything to remain on the table, I don't think the Russians would have invaded.
So let's go back to Ukraine and Europe. There was some uprising in Ukraine because the then Ukrainian government wanted to align with Russia, called the Euromaidan uprising. And it was simply because the Association Act was not signed by an incumbent, Viktor Yanukovych, and what happened, the people took to the streets, and it led to a big revolution in Ukraine. A lot of people in this argument posit the article written by Henry Kissinger in 2014 that talks about neutrality. Do you really think the Ukrainians want to be neutral, or they want to tilt towards the West? And in celebration of the life of Madeline Albright, a lot of people are looking back in history and saying, was that needless loss of life necessary because America didn't intervene in Kosovo on time?
To your last question, yes. The failure to intervene led to considerable loss of life. But the scenario that you created, about the massive demonstration, I think it was that same demonstration, that same anger by the people of Ukraine, if I'm right, that eventually led to the election of the current president. And I think on this same platform, I had said a couple of weeks ago that it was also part of the Russian miscalculation, the pressure put on that regime, that invariably led to the election of the current president. So you could say that the miscalculations that we all talk about did not actually start today. It's just been one miscalculation and the other. And the overall consequences is what's going on in Ukraine today.
Okay, Ambassador Keshi, the Kremlin has threatened that if it faces an existential threat, it will not hesitate to deploy its nuclear arsenal. Do you think that there is that possibility?
Well, the thing about, I'm not too sure that we are out of the balance of terror yet. We are still within the balance of terror. So if they are the first to strike, they should also be prepared for the consequences of retaliation by, other powers. And I think that if they strike first and other nuclear powers decide to strike back, I think Russia will regret its actions. So I said on your program the last time that I believe he won't go as far as using nuclear weapon, for the simple reason that he, at least if for nothing else, I want to believe that he is fully aware of the consequences of striking first. the simple theory of the balance of terror is that if you strike first, you stand a very good chance of being hit harder than your first hit itself. And so I think it's going to be very reasonable on this. But he's putting that on the table, again, to deter the United States and its allies, from going too far in whatever help they want to give to Ukraine. But I'm very confident. I'm very sure that when the chips are down, the United States and its allies, are fully aware of that, and they will find a way to get themselves prepared for whatever Putin, wants to do. Again, I'm very confident of one thing, that at this point in time, just like the Ukrainian, the West is also resolved that they are going to see this to its logical conclusion. Now, what that logical conclusion is, I really don't know, because some of the conditions being given for peace, well, if the Ukrainians are ready to accept it and give up half of their territory, that is okay. But then the question would be, why have you fought so long? Only to lose a substantial part of your territory and then become part of Russia at the end of the day. So we simply wait and see what happens in the next few weeks, or who knows, whether a month from today we'll be back again saying 2 months, nothing has changed.
Very much, Ambassador Joe Keshi, for joining us on the morning show today.